My name is Karim Azar, and for over 3 decades, I devoted my life to serving as an Imam in the heart of Detroit, Michigan. My days were a symphony of prayer, study, and teaching. The Quran was not just a book to me. It was my compass, my foundation, the lens through which I viewed every aspect of life. From leading prayers at the mosque to counseling members of my community, I was their spiritual guide, a figure that trusted to point them toward righteousness. At home, my family mirrored my devotion. My wife, Layla, was my pillar of support, and my children grew up steeped in the teachings of Islam. I took pride in the life we built, a life centered on faith, discipline, and tradition. Each day began before dawn with Fajr prayer, and every evening ended with the recitation of verses from the Quran. The rhythm of our lives was one of devotion, and I believed it was enough. But beneath the surface, there was a restlessness I never dared to confront. Questions lingered at the edges of my mind, questions about the nature of God, about salvation, and about the contradictions I had encountered over the years. Yet, I pushed them aside, convinced that doubt was a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor of faith I had so carefully constructed. On a cold January evening, as I finished leading the Isha prayer at the mosque, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The congregation had gathered in large numbers, their voices joining mine in unified worship. I shook hands with the men, exchanged warm greetings, and offered words of encouragement to those seeking guidance. As I stepped outside into the crisp winter air, I thought to myself, this is what life is about, serving God and leading others to do the same. Little did I know, everything I thought I understood about God, about faith, and about myself was about to be challenged in ways I could never have imagined. That evening marked the beginning of a journey that would shatter my perceptions and lead me to a truth far greater than anything I had ever known. It began with silence. Not the calm, soothing kind of silence, but an oppressive, suffocating absence of sound. I found myself floating, weightless, in an endless expanse of blackness. There was no sense of direction, no up, no down, just an all-consuming void. My thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Is this death? I wondered. Am I meeting Allah now as I have prayed so many times before? The stillness was unsettling, but it didn't last. Slowly, faint whispers began to seep into the darkness. At first they were barely audible, like the murmur of distant waves. But they grew louder, more insistent, surrounding me from every direction. The whispers became words. Words I couldn't quite understand. Yet they carried a chilling familiarity. "Karim," the whispers called. "Karim, look." I tried to respond, but my voice was swallowed by the void. Panic began to set in. Where was I? Was this some test of faith? My mind clung to the prayers I had recited all my life, the verses I had taught others to repeat in moments of fear. Yet here in the darkness, those words felt hollow, as if they evaporated the moment they left my lips. Then, from the depths of the void, a presence began to form, not visible, but palpable. It was vast, overwhelming, and unlike anything I had ever felt before. It didn't speak in words, but in a resonance that seemed to vibrate through my entire being. "Karim," the presence said, its voice echoing both within me and around me. "You have spent your life searching, but you have never truly asked the questions that matter." What questions? I thought desperately. Before I could even form the words, the void began to shift. The blackness turned to a murky gray, and then to a deep red. A faint light appeared in the distance, flickering like a candle. I felt an unseen force pulling me toward it, and though I wanted to resist, I couldn't. My body, or whatever form I was in, moved without my consent, gliding closer and closer to the source of the light. As I drew near, the whispers grew louder, transforming into screams. They were voices, men, women, even children, all crying out in anguish. Their pain was palpable, a weight that pressed against my chest and made it hard to breathe. What is this place? I thought, terror gripping me. No answer came, only more screams. Shadows began to form around me, their shapes twisted and indistinct. They reached out as if to grab me, their fingers stretching into claws, their faces contorted in expressions of torment. I recoiled, but there was nowhere to go. In the distance, I saw something rising from the red haze. A massive throne, its edges lined with fire. The throne loomed high above everything else, and sitting upon it was a figure. At first I couldn't make out who it was, but as I moved closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. It was a man bound by chains, his hands and feet shackled. His eyes, filled with sorrow, locked onto mine, and I recognized him instantly. My knees gave way beneath me as I fell to the ground, trembling. "No," I whispered, "this can't be real. It can't be him." But it was. The man on the throne, the one I had spoken of with reverence in every sermon, was the Prophet Muhammad. He sat silently, his face a mixture of pain and regret. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze any longer. This must be a test, I thought frantically, a trial from Allah to prove my faith. But the oppressive presence around me said otherwise. The void seemed to close in tighter, and the screams of the damned grew deafening. "Kareem," the voice boomed again, shaking the very fabric of the space around me. "This is not a test. This is the truth you have refused to see." I clutched my chest as an unbearable weight pressed down on me, crushing my spirit. My prayers faltered, my words evaporating into the void. For the first time in my life, I was utterly powerless. And I prayed outright. "What truth?" I screamed into the darkness. "What is this place? Why am I here?" The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, the light around the throne grew brighter, illuminating the twisted valley below. There, I saw countless souls writhing in torment, their cries piercing through the air. Some crawled on their hands and knees, their bodies scorched by flames that erupted from the ground. Others were bound by chains, dragged through the dirt by unseen forces. Among them I recognized faces of people I had known in life, members of my congregation, scholars I had admired, even friends who had once stood beside me in prayer. Their eyes met mine, filled with a despair that shook me to my core. "How can this be?" I whispered. "They were faithful. They followed Allah. They followed me." The voice returned, cold and unyielding. "You have preached a path of tradition, Karim, but it is not the path of truth. Everything you believed is about to be revealed." I tried to protest, to argue, but the words caught in my throat. Deep down I felt it, the weight of my own doubt, the questions I had buried for so long. And now, here in this void, there was no escaping them. The throne loomed closer, its flames licking the edges of the figure who sat upon it. And in that moment, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. There was no movement. This wasn't just a revelation. This was judgment. As I stood trembling, the red haze around me began to dissipate, revealing a landscape unlike anything I had ever seen or imagined. It was vast, stretching endlessly in all directions, yet suffocating in its closeness. A jagged valley lay before me, its depths shrouded in a sinister glow. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning flesh and sulfur, each breath clawing at my lungs. Above, the sky was a swirling mass of dark crimson, heavy and oppressive. This was not just a place. It was a realm of agony. I tried to look away, but my gaze was drawn to the depths of the valley. It was filled with writhing figures, their bodies contorted in grotesque ways, as if the very ground beneath them rejected their existence. Their screams were a chorus of despair, rising and falling in waves that crashed against my soul. Men and women clawed at the ground, their hands blistered and bleeding. Others were bound in chains, dragged mercilessly by shadowy entities that seemed to revel in their suffering. A figure stumbled near the edge of the valley, his face twisted in agony. His hands clawed at the air as flames erupted from beneath him, licking at his body and consuming him whole. Yet, horrifyingly, he didn't perish. His flesh burned, melted and reformed, only for the cycle to begin again. His screams cut through the chaos, piercing my very being. I recognized him. He had once been a devout member of my congregation, a man who had spent hours in prayer and fasting, a man I had admired for his piety. Yet here he was, lost in torment. My legs felt weak, and I fell to my knees, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. "Why?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Why is he here? The answer came not in words, but in the faces of the others I began to recognize. Friends, scholars, mentors, men and women who had lived their lives in devotion to the faith. They had prayed as I prayed, fasted as I fasted, followed the teachings as I had taught them. And yet they were here, condemned to this unimaginable suffering. I tried to turn away, but my attention was drawn to the massive pillars that jutted out from the ground like grotesque monuments. Each pillar was adorned with symbols of power and wealth: crowns, gold coins, elaborate scepters. Around the base of one pillar, figures writhed in agony, their chains dragging them toward the flames.
One of them stood out, a man dressed in tattered, once regal clothing. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, yet I recognized him. He had been a wealthy benefactor in our community, someone who had built his life on wealth and influence, while preaching charity and humility. Now, his wealth had become his torment. The flames consumed him, and his voice echoed in anguish.
We were warned, he cried, but we did not listen. We placed our trust in ourselves, in our possessions, and not in the truth.
I tried to look away, but the ground beneath me began to shift. I was no longer standing on solid earth, but on something alive, something that pulsed and writhed beneath my feet. I stumbled back, only to find myself face to face with another pillar, this one surrounded by religious leaders. They were dressed in the garments of their faith, robes, turbans, prayer shawls. Yet they were bound by chains that burned their flesh. I recognized their faces, too. Some were rabbis, others priests, and among them, imams.
Their screams tore through the air, but it was their faces that haunted me most. Faces filled with regret, their mouths whispering prayers that went unanswered. One of them turned to me, his eyes meeting mine. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but his expressions said it all. This was not a place of redemption. This was a place of judgment.
The voice returned, reverberating through the valley with an authority that silenced even the screams. Hammett settled on his haunches, escaping the terrifying scene.
Kerim, it said, you have led others astray, not by malice, but by blindness. You clung to tradition and pride, and in doing so, you turned away from the truth.
Oh, no, I cried, my voice cracking. I followed the teachings. I served Allah with all my heart. This cannot be my fate. But even as I spoke, the weight of the words pressed against me. Deep down, I knew there was truth in what the voice had said. I had ignored the questions that lingered in my heart, silencing them with ritual and routine. I had preached a faith that I had never truly examined, relying on the teachings of others without seeking the truth for myself.
The figures around me seemed to sense my despair. One of them, a fellow Imam I had once admired, reached out toward me. His hand was engulfed in flames, yet it didn't burn away. His voice, strained and broken, echoed in my mind. We were blind, Kareem. We led others to the same blindness, and now we pay the price.
I wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but there was no escape. The valley stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of torment and despair. Everywhere I turned, I saw faces I recognized, each one a reminder of the life I had lived and the consequences I now faced. In the distance, the throne still loomed, its fiery glow illuminating the valley. The figure upon it, Muhammad, sat silently, his chains glinting in the light. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with sorrow, as if he, too, bore the weight of my despair. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face.
The voice responded, its tone unyielding, yet filled with a strange sense of compassion.
You have sought mercy, Karim, but you've sought it in the wrong place. You have followed the teachings of men and ignored the call of the one who can truly save. This is the result of that choice.
As the weight of those words settled upon me, I felt an overwhelming sense of regret. The screams of the valley grew louder, the flames brighter, and I realized that this place was not just a realm of punishment. It was a reflection of the choices we had made, the truths we had ignored, and the pride that had blinded us.
But even in that moment of despair, a faint glimmer of hope stirred within me. The voice had said, "I sought mercy in the wrong place." Did that mean there was still a chance? Could the truth I had ignored be the key to my salvation?
The ground beneath me shifted again, and the flames began to rise. The valley seemed to close in around me, but in the distance, a light appeared, a light that pierced through the darkness, brighter and more radiant than anything I had ever seen.
It called to me, pulling me away from the torment and despair. And for the first time, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. The light grew brighter, piercing through the oppressive darkness and filling the valley with an intensity that both frightened and drew me in. It wasn't like the fiery glow of the torment around me. This light was pure, soothing, and yet overwhelming. It illuminated everything, revealing details I hadn't faded before. The screams of the tormented faded into a low hum as the light enveloped me, forcing me to shield my eyes. The fire in the hub.
And then I saw it. A book, suspended in midair, appeared within the light. Its cover was ornate, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. I recognized it immediately. It was the Quran. My heart pounded as the pages began to turn on their own, each one flipping slowly, as if guided by an unseen hand. The words on the pages seemed to glow, their meaning sharper and clearer than I had ever experienced.
A voice resonated from the light, filling the space around me with a power that shook my very being. It wasn't harsh, but it was unyielding, carrying authority beyond anything I had ever known.
"Kareem," the voice said, "you have devoted your life to this book, but have you ever truly understood it? Have you questioned what it reveals and what it conceals?" The question struck me like a thunderbolt. My lips trembled, but no words came out. Had I questioned it? No, I hadn't. I had accepted it without hesitation, without doubt, believing it to be the ultimate truth.
The pages of the Quran began to turn faster, their glow intensifying. Images started to rise from the pages, forming scenes that played out before me like visions. At first, I saw the Kaaba, surrounded by pilgrims dressed in white, bowing in unison. It was a familiar sight, one that had always filled me with pride in my faith. But the scene shifted. The Kaaba was no longer the sacred sanctuary I knew. It was surrounded by idols, hundreds of them, carved from stone and wood. People bowed before them, offering incense and sacrifices. My heart sank as I recognized the names of these idols: Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, Manat. They were the gods of pre-Islamic Arabia, the very idols I had condemned in my sermons.
"What is this?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "This is the age of ignorance before Islam. Why am I seeing this?"
The voice responded, calm yet piercing. "These are the roots of what you have followed, Kareem. Have you ever questioned who Allah truly is?"
The question hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. My mind raced. I had never asked myself that. Allah was the creator, the most merciful, the one true God, wasn't he? But the images before me painted a different picture.
The scene shifted again. This time, I saw ancient temples in a foreign land, their architecture unfamiliar. People gathered around a massive idol, its face imposing and stern. The name etched into its base sent a shiver down my spine. Baal. My knees buckled as I realized the connection. The word Baal was similar to the ancient Semitic term for Lord. It was an idol worshipped by the Canaanites, and its name echoed through the histories of idolatry.
Why are you showing me this? I cried, tears streaming down my face.
The voice grew closer, almost whispering in my ear. The God you have followed was known by many names, in many ages. But Karim, have you ever sought to know him as he truly is? The Quran in front of me began to glow brighter, its pages now turning so quickly they became a blur. A final image emerged, one that stopped my heart. It was a man, dressed in white robes, with a face radiant and familiar. He was teaching a group of followers, his hands outstretched, his words filled with love and power. I knew who he was, even before the name formed in my mind.
Jesus, I whispered.
The voice spoke again, this time with an urgency that resonated deep within me. Karim, you have rejected him all your life, but he is the truth you have sought. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him.
I shook my head, tears falling freely. No, I can't accept that. I've devoted my life to Allah, to Muhammad. How can I turn away from everything I believe?
The figure of Jesus in the vision turned to me, his eyes filled with compassion and understanding. His gaze pierced through every barrier I had built around my heart, exposing the doubts and fears I had hidden for so long. You have followed tradition, but tradition cannot save you, the voice said. You have clung to pride, but pride blinds you to the truth. Will you humble yourself and see? The light around me intensified, and for a moment I felt a warmth I had never known. It wasn't just physical warmth. It was a warmth that wrapped around my soul, filling the emptiness I hadn't even realized was there.
What is this? I whispered, my voice shaking. This is the age of ignorance before Islam. Why am I seeing this? The voice responded, calm yet piercing. These are the roots of what you have followed, Karim. Have you ever questioned who Allah truly is? The question hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. My mind raced. I'd never asked myself that. Allah was the creator, the most merciful, the one true God, wasn't he? But the images before me painted a different picture. The scene shifted again. This time I saw ancient temples in a foreign land, their architecture unfamiliar. People gathered around a massive idol, its face imposing and stern. The name etched into its base sent a shiver down my spine, Baal. My knees buckled as I realized the connection. The word Baal was similar to the ancient Semitic term for Lord. It was an idol worshipped by the Canaanites, and its name echoed through the histories of idolatry. Where are you showing me this? I cried, tears streaming down my face, reading my mind, my kid bales. You have my word on that mortal honor, said he. The voice grew closer, almost whispering in my ear. The God you have followed was known by many names in many ages. But Karim, have you ever sought to know him as he truly is? The Quran in front of me began to glow brighter, its pages now turning so quickly they became a blur. A final image emerged, one that stopped my heart. It was a man, dressed in white robes, with a face radiant and familiar. He was teaching a group of followers, his hands outstretched, his words filled with love and power. I knew who he was even before the name formed in my mind. Jesus, I whispered. The voice spoke again, this time with an urgency that resonated deep within me. Karim, you have rejected him all your life, but he is the truth you have sought. He is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. I shook my head, tears falling freely. No, I can't accept that. I've devoted my life to Allah, to Muhammad. How can I turn away from everything I've believed? The figure of Jesus in the vision turned to me, his eyes filled with compassion and understanding. His gaze pierced through every barrier I had built around my heart, exposing the doubts and fears I had hidden for so long. "You have followed tradition, but tradition cannot save you," the voice said. "You have clung to pride, but pride blinds you to the truth. Will you humble yourself and see?" The light around me intensified, and for a moment, I felt a warmth I had never known. It wasn't just physical warmth. It was a warmth that wrapped around my soul, filling the emptiness I hadn't even realized was there. "Kareem," the voice continued, softer now. "The truth has been before you all along. Will you accept it?" I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what I was experiencing. The truth I had resisted for so long was now undeniable. I looked up at the figure of Jesus, his presence radiating love and mercy, and for the first time in my life, I whispered the words I never thought I would say. "Lord, show me the way." As the light enveloped me, the darkness of the valley faded away. The screams of torment were replaced by a profound silence, broken only by the steady beat of my heart. I was no longer in the valley of despair. I was being lifted out of it. But I knew this was only the beginning. The journey to the truth was far from over. As the valley of torment disappeared, I found myself standing in a realm of unparalleled light. The radiance was overwhelming, yet it didn't burn or blind. It was a light that seemed to enter my very soul, exposing every corner of my being. The air was filled with a sense of peace, unlike anything I had ever known. And yet, I could feel a weight within me, a lingering burden of all that I had believed, taught, and lived. Before me stood the figure I had seen in the vision earlier, dressed in white robes, his face shining with a love so profound it was both comforting and terrifying. His eyes met mine, and I felt as if he could see not just my thoughts but every moment of my life, every prayer, every doubt, every act of pride, and every act of devotion. In a long-looking mirror, he glanced at my face. "Kareem," he spoke, his voice resonating with authority and compassion. "You have sought the truth all your life, but you sought it in shadows, in pieces of light that could never reveal the fullness of who I am." I trembled at his words, unable to speak. Tears streamed down my face as I felt the weight of my life pressing down on me. The rituals, the sermons, the countless hours spent teaching others, all of it now seemed so fragile, so incomplete. "Who are you?" I finally managed to whisper, my voice breaking. Are you the Messiah?" His expression softened and he stepped closer. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." The words struck me like a lightning bolt, their weight far greater than I could bear. I had read them before, dismissed them, argued against them in my sermons, but here, spoken by the one who embodied them, they carried a power I could not deny. "But I followed Allah," I cried, my voice filled with desperation. "I prayed, I fasted, I taught others to do the same, I devoted my life to Him. Was it all for nothing?" He reached out his hand toward me, and though he didn't touch me, I felt a warmth spread through my entire being. "You followed what you believed to be true," he said gently, "but belief alone cannot save you. Truth is not found in rituals or traditions. It is found in me." The words pierced my heart and I fell to my knees, sobbing. "I thought I knew Him. I thought I was serving Him." "You were searching for Him," he said, "but you did not know that I am He. I and the Father are one. To know me is to know the Father." In that moment, the scenes of my life began to unfold before me, not as memories, but as living, breathing moments. I saw myself as a young man, passionately studying the Quran, reciting its verses with a fervor I thought was unshakable. I saw the pride in my heart as I delivered sermons, believing I held the truth in my hands, and I saw the doubts, the questions I had buried deep inside me, afraid of what they might reveal. Then, the scenes shifted. I saw moments of grace I had never noticed before, times when Christian friends had tried to share their faith with me, times when I had stumbled across verses from the Bible that stirred something in my soul. I saw a woman weeping as she prayed in a church, her faith so raw and genuine it made me uncomfortable. Each moment was a thread, weaving together a tapestry I had ignored. "Why did I not see this before?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You were blinded by pride," he said, his tone not condemning but truthful. You trusted in what you had been taught, rather than seeking me with your whole heart. But now, I have opened your eyes." The light around him intensified, and I felt a presence I could only describe as divine. A love so pure and overwhelming it brought me to the edge of breaking. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be in the presence of God. It was not fear or duty that filled my heart, but love. A love that surpassed anything I had ever known. "Must I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come to me," he said simply. "Surrender your pride, your fears, your doubts. Accept the gift of salvation I have already given you through my sacrifice. You are not saved by your works, Karim, but by grace through faith." I wept openly, the truth of his words washing over me like a tidal wave. All my life I had believed salvation was something to be earned through effort, through devotion, through endless striving. But here, in the presence of the one who held the power to save, I realized how futile my efforts had been. "Lord," I whispered, the word feeling foreign yet right on my lips, "forgive me. I see now that I was lost. I see now that you are the truth." His hand extended again, and this time I reached out, my trembling fingers brushing against his. The moment our hands met, a surge of light engulfed me, filling every corner of my being with warmth, peace, and an indescribable joy. The weight I had carried all my life, the pride, the fear, the guilt, was lifted, replaced by a lightness I had never known. "You are forgiven," he said, his voice like a melody. "You are loved. Now, go and tell others what you have seen and heard. Do not keep this truth to yourself." The light around him began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled back, the realm of glory giving way to the familiar sensations of my physical body. But his words remained, echoing in my heart, filling me with a purpose I had never known. As the light dimmed, I realized I was no longer the same. The truth had set me free, and I would never look back. The first thing I felt was air filling my lungs, a desperate, almost painful gasp as if I had been drowning and finally breached the surface. My body felt heavy, my chest tight, and every nerve seemed to scream with awareness. Blinding light shone above me, not the radiant warmth I had just experienced, but the harsh fluorescence of a hospital room. I blinked, disoriented, trying to make sense of where I was. The sharp beeping of a heart monitor echoed in my ears, and blurred shapes hovered over me, their voices urgent but muffled. My chest rose and fell erratically, each breath feeling like fire, but I was alive. "His breathing," a voice called out, filled with relief. As my vision cleared, I saw the face of a nurse leaning over me, her blonde hair tucked behind her ears and her eyes full of concern. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You're very lucky. You've been given a second chance." Her words cut through the haze in my mind. A second chance. They carried a weight that pierced through the physical pain, reminding me of where I had just been. My memories flooded back. The valley of torment, the figure of Jesus, the overwhelming light of truth. It was all so vivid, more real than anything I had ever experienced in my life. "Where?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital," she said gently. "You went into cardiac arrest. We thought we lost you." Cardiac arrest? My heart had stopped. I had been clinically dead. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I had died. I had seen hell. And I had been brought back. But why? As the nurse adjusted the monitors around me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. The fluorescent lights above seemed cold and sterile compared to the radiant light I had seen in the other realm. My chest ached, but the pain paled in comparison to the turmoil in my heart. "Which God?" I whispered, barely audible. The nurse paused, looking at me with confusion. "What did you say?" she asked, leaning closer. "Which God brought me back?" I asked again, my voice trembling. The question was as much for myself as it was for her. My entire life I had prayed to Allah, trusted in Him, devoted every breath to His worship. But now, after what I had seen, I wasn't sure anymore. The nurse gave me a puzzled smile, as if she thought the medication was clouding my mind. "God," she said simply, before turning back to her work. "But which God?" The question echoed in my mind, louder with each passing second. I had seen the throne. I had seen the torment of those who had rejected the truth. And I had seen him, the one who claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus. The days that followed were a blur of recovery. My family visited, their faces filled with worry and relief. My wife held my hand, her eyes wet with tears as she whispered prayers of gratitude. My children sat quietly, unsure of what to say, but I couldn't focus on them. My mind was consumed by the visions I had seen, the truths I could no longer ignore. Each night, as I lay in the sterile hospital bed, I closed my eyes and tried to push the images away, but they wouldn't leave me. The valley of torment, the radiant figure of Jesus, his words that had pierced my soul, they played on an endless loop in my mind. The more I tried to dismiss them, the more real they became. On the third day, a man entered my room. He was dressed in a simple white collar and carried a worn Bible in his hands. I recognized him immediately as a priest. He approached quietly, his demeanor calm and gentle. "Hello, Karim," he said, his voice steady. "I'm Father Jonathan. The hospital chaplain asked me to stop by and see you." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss him, to send him away, and cling to the faith I had always known. But another part of me, a part I couldn't ignore, wanted to hear what he had to say. "You've seen something," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Haven't you?" My breath caught in my throat. How did he know? Could he see it in my face? Or was it something more? "Who?" Father Jonathan asked gently, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "Jesus," I whispered, the name feeling foreign and yet undeniable on my lips. He told me he is the way, the truth, and the life." Father Jonathan nodded, his expression calm but intent. "And what do you believe now?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting. What did I believe? Everything I had once thought was solid ground now felt like quicksand. The traditions, the teachings, the rituals, they all seemed hollow in the light of what I had seen. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I thought I knew the truth. I thought I was serving God. But now I don't know." Father Jonathan opened the Bible in his hands and began to read, his voice steady and full of conviction. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." The words cut through me like a blade, sharp and undeniable. Tears streamed down my face as I listened, my heart aching with both sorrow and hope. "Karim," he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder, "you've been given a gift, a chance to see the truth. Don't ignore it. Seek him, and you will find him." That night, alone in my hospital bed, I closed my eyes and whispered the words I never thought I would say. "Jesus, if you are the truth, show me. I want to know you." For the first time since I had returned, I felt a peace wash over me, a peace that was not born of ritual or effort, but of surrender. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing: my life could never be the same. This was not just a return to life, it was the beginning of something far greater. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of my home, a light so warm and welcoming that it reminded me of the radiant glow I had seen in my vision. But this time, it wasn't just light illuminating the room, it was a reflection of the transformation within me. My life, once grounded in rituals and pride, was now guided by a profound sense of peace, purpose, and truth. I sat at the small table in my living room, a Bible open before me. The words leapt off the page, alive and vibrant, filling my heart with a joy I had never known. Each verse carried a weight, a depth, a love that I had once dismissed, but now embraced. The pages of this book didn't just tell a story. They spoke to my story. They spoke to my soul, answering the questions I had buried deep inside for so long. Across from me sat Father Jonathan, his calm and encouraging presence a source of comfort. He had walked with me through every step of this journey, patiently answering my endless questions, guiding me through the doubts that still lingered like shadows. "Karim," he said, closing his Bible and meeting my gaze. "Today is the day you declare to the world what has already taken place in your heart." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. Today was my baptism. Today, I would publicly proclaim the truth I had encountered, the truth that had shattered my old life and rebuilt me anew. As we drove to the church, my thoughts wandered to the life I had left behind. My family, my community, my role as an imam, all of it was gone. My wife had left me, unable to reconcile the man she had known with the man I had become. My children, torn between love and loyalty to their faith, had distanced themselves. I had been cast out of the mosque, shunned by those I had once called brothers. But as painful as those losses were, they didn't compare to the overwhelming joy of knowing the truth. The chains of pride and fear that had bound me for decades were gone. Replaced by the freedom I found in Christ, I no longer felt the weight of trying to earn salvation through endless striving. Instead, I rested in the grace and love of the one who had saved me, not because of what I had done, but because of who he is. The church was small, simple, and filled with warmth. A handful of believers greeted me with open arms, their smiles genuine and their eyes filled with compassion. They didn't see me as the man I had been. They saw the man I had become. The baptismal pool shimmered in the light, its water clear and inviting. As I stepped into it, a wave of emotion washed over me. This was more than a ritual. It was a declaration, a surrender, a new beginning. Father Jonathan stood beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "Karim," he said, his voice steady, "do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, the way, the truth, and the life?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm and unshaken. "I believe. Do you accept him as your Lord and Savior, trusting in his sacrifice for your salvation?" "I do," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Then it is my honor to baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." As I was lowered into the water, the world seemed to fade away. In that moment, I felt the weight of my old life, the doubts, the pride, the blindness, being washed away. When I rose, gasping for air, it was as if I had been reborn. The light I had seen in my vision now filled my heart, brighter and more radiant than ever before. The congregation erupted in applause, their joy echoing through the small sanctuary. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alive. As I stepped out of the pool, Father Jonathan handed me a towel and whispered, "Welcome to the family of Christ." That night, as I knelt in prayer by my bedside, I didn't pray out of obligation or fear. I prayed out of love and gratitude. "Thank you, Jesus," I whispered, my hands trembling. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Use me, Lord, to bring others to you." Over the following weeks and months, my life became a testimony. I began sharing my story with anyone who would listen. Neighbors, strangers, even those from my former community who reached out in curiosity or condemnation. Some mocked me, others ignored me, but a few listened. And in those moments of connection, I saw the seeds of truth being planted. One day, as I was studying the Bible, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my eldest son standing there, his face hesitant but hopeful. In his hands, he held a Bible. "Can we talk, Father?" he asked, his voice soft. I smiled, tears welling up in my eyes. "Of course, my son, let's talk." The journey hadn't been easy, and I knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But I also knew that I wasn't walking it alone. The one who had saved me, the one who had pulled me from the valley of torment and into the light of truth, was with me every step of the way. My name is Karim. I once lived in darkness, blinded by pride and tradition. But now I walk in the light, redeemed by grace and held by the love of Christ. This is my new life, and I will never go back.